Hello! Last weekend I made a video looking through Time Magazine's 100 must-read books from 2024, and I was a bit disappointed with myself and how few of those books I've actually read. I think this is partly because it's a US magazine and I live here in the UK, and publications between the two countries do differ somewhat, especially in regards to nonfiction. And this past week, the New York Times released their 100 notable books from 2024. So just for fun, I want to have a look through this list as well and see if I fare any better, but also hopefully become aware of some books that I might not have heard of before. And I would love to hear how many of these have you read, how many would you also recommend, and how many do you want to read, and are there any books that you think that they have left off the list? Please let me know about that in the comments below. So I've not looked through this list yet, and I'm just going to scroll through. They give these options where you can select whether I've read it or I want to read it. And interestingly, with this publication, they never give you the option of I don't want to read it, which I think is valid for some readers that, you know, maybe in an ideal world you would like to read it, but we only have so much time, don't we? So for the very first book is All Fours by Miranda July, which was recently shortlisted for the National Book Award, and I've still not read it, but I've read Miranda July's fiction in the past. I do really want to get to this book, so I will select I want to read it. Okay, next, Beautyland. I do want to read this novel because, again, I've read a previous novel by this author, Marie-Helene Bertino, so yes, I do definitely want to read that as well. Black River, I've not really heard of this before. I don't think. Although interesting, they also give suggestions of for fans of particular books to compare them to. And the one they compared this to is The Seven Moons of Molly Almeida, which is a novel I absolutely loved that I was rooting for to win the Booker Prize, and then it did, and I was so glad that it did. So yes, I will say I want to read this as well. Bluff by Danez Smith. Yes, this is another book I want to read because I've not read it yet, but I've read Danez Smith's poetry in the past and really admire their writing, so I want to read it. The Book of Love by Kelly Link, another book that I've read about and do want to read. Oh, I'm not faring so much better with this list, am I? The Bright Sword. Now, I've read about this book, and yeah, I think it would sound like a lot of fun, but I don't know if I'm up for Arthurian fantasy. I mean, it does say for fans of Wolf Hall, which I was a big fan of, so okay, I'll select I want to read it. The Coin, another novel that I keep hearing so many great things about, so yes, definitely want to read that, and recommending it for readers of The Guest and My Year of Rest and Relaxation, which yes, I'm fans of those too. Colored Television, another novel that everyone seems to keep talking about, so definitely want to read that. And someone just told me in the comments recently that Danzy Senna is married to Percival Everett, which I hadn't realized before, and they recommend this for fans of Erasure by Percival Everett. So what a literary power couple. I mean, it's so great. Creation Lake. Now, I have read this, yes. I read that with my online book club, had lots of great discussions about it. Dead in Long Beach, California. I've not heard of this before. It's a first novel, experimental and disarmingly funny, for fans of Melissa Broder, which, yeah, interesting. Okay, I'll select I want to read it. The Empasium, Olga Tokarczuk. I got a copy of this recently from a bookstore, and I've read Tokarczuk's fiction in the past, had mixed responses to it, but this sounds more on the line of her novel Drive Your Plow Over the Bones of the Dead, and I did love reading that book, so I do want to read that. The Familiar. I'm curious about this historical fantasy book, but I don't know if I'll actually get time to read it or get around to reading it. I don't know if you've read it. Let me know what you think, and especially if you think that I would like it, given my bookish taste. But I'm gonna just not select that for the time being. There's Poetry, a film in which I play everyone. I love that title, and I've not heard of this collection before. So yeah, I'll select I want to. Oh, Forest of Noise, another poetry collection that I just got a copy of recently, and it sounds so interesting, and a lot of people are talking about. Sounds very topical, so I want to read that. Funny Story by Emily Henry, a summer rom-com. I'm sure it's a lot of fun, but especially because it's described as a summer rom-com and we're going into winter, so it doesn't seem like quite the right time for it, and I'm not sure I would enjoy that, so I'll skip over that. Ghost Roots, yes, a collection of stories and set in Nigeria that I do really want to get to reading. Was also a finalist for the National Book Award, so yes, want to read that. The God of the Woods by Liz Moore. I'm not sure. I've heard such mixed things about this. That's just what I've heard from other readers. Obviously not experienced it myself. So yeah, I'll select I want to read it. Maybe one day. New book by Joseph O'Neill. Who I'm not sure I've read any Joseph O'Neill before. But yeah, I would really like to read this. Not doing all that great. Dolly Alderton's new novel, Good Material, romantic comedy. Again, that's not completely my vibe. So yeah, I'll skip over that for the moment. Great Expectations. I've read about this novel. I think it sounds so interesting, so definitely want to read it. Headshot by Rita Bullwinkle. Yes, I have read that. Great book. The Hunter by Tana French. Thriller. I've not read it. Want to read it. Intermezzo. Yes, I've read it. I think it's great. Although an author friend of mine just told me recently he couldn't get through it. But yeah, personally, I really enjoyed these like rich discussions and following the thoughts and feelings of these brothers through time. Yay, James by Percival Everett, the winner of this year's National Book Award. I was so glad to see that it won, and Percival Everett gave such a great speech to that. So yes, I've read that. Joy in Service on Rue Tagore, a poetry collection. I've not heard of this, but I ought to read more poetry, so I'll click I want to read it. Long Island Compromise, another novel that I hadn't heard of before looking at some of these lists, but now keep hearing about it, and heard really good things, so they compare it to The Bee Sting and White Teeth by Zadie Smith, so yes, definitely want to read that. Martyr, yes, great novel. I've read that, really enjoyed it. The Mighty Red, Louise Erdrich's new novel. I do want to read this. I have a copy of it. I keep meaning to get to it, and a member of my book club just told me recently how good she was finding it. So yes, I want to read that. Modern Poetry, poetry collection, obviously. A grandiose title is tongue-in-cheek mostly. These witty, sexy, sometimes heartbreaking personal lyrics demonstrate how ordinary life stuff can be the stuff of poetry. I want to read that. My favorite thing is Monsters Book 2, a graphic novel. Well, I've not read Book 1, so I think I'll skip over that. The Mysterious Case of the Alperton Angels, a mystery. An epistolary novel. Oh, I do enjoy an epistolary novel, a novel told in letters. So, okay, yes, I want to read that. Neighbors and Other Stories by Diane Oliver, literary fiction. I've had a copy of this collection of stories, been really wanting to read it. The author died quite young, and so yes, definitely want to read that. Our Evenings by Alan Hollinghurst. Yes, just read this recently with my online book club. Such a rich novel. Not one necessarily so concerned with a thrilling plot, but the way he creates scenes and characters and gives such a beautiful evocation of the movement of time in our relationship to time as we get older. I thought it was so beautifully done, and I loved reading it. So yes, I've read that. The Pairing by Casey McQuiston. A gourmet Euro trip romance. That sounds like a really fun romp. It's not really my thing, but sure, I'll click. I want to read it. Piglet, a novel that I think is coming out here in the UK next year. But yes, so I want to read that. The Practice, the Horizon, and the Chain, science fiction. Sly and Slicing Grace. This far future fable is set on spaceships, stratified into rigid social hierarchies. Yeah, I think it sounds like I would enjoy that. So I'll click I want to read that. Praiseworthy by Alexis Wright. Now, I've been wanting to read this Australian novel for quite a while, but it's quite big and from what I've heard, quite difficult. A fellow reader that I know who also follows a lot of book prizes and reads a lot of literary fiction, he said that it was too challenging for him. So that makes me slightly trepidatious about reading it, but yes, I do want to read it. Rake's Fall, another book of science fiction. Okay, I'll click I want to read that. Reboot, another novel of literary fiction, a satire of modern media and pop culture. About a former child actor who is trying to revive the TV show that made him famous. It feels like every TV show that I watched growing up in the 90s is like coming back and being rebooted. And so yeah, that's a fun idea. So I want to read that. Rejection, the story collection, which as far as I'm aware, hasn't been published in the UK, but I do really want to read it, a book of interlinked short stories, and I do love that. Oh, interesting, for fans of American Psycho and also of Tessa Moshfegh. So definitely want to read that. The Safekeep by Yael van der Voden. Yes, I've read it. Such a great, such a well-paced novel that also gives this meaningful look at like history and looking at who belongs where and who owns what, and really great. The sequel. So yeah, I've heard about this before, and it sounds really fun. So click want to read that. Shred Sisters, a coming of age novel, which I don't think I've heard of that before, but sounds interesting. The Silence of the Choir, literary fiction, a book set in a Sicilian town, a polyphonic novel. Okay, yeah, I would go for that. Smoke Kings, a thriller. Okay, I don't always immediately go to thrillers, but maybe I should read more, so I'll click yes, I want to read it. Someone Like Us, I keep hearing great things about what they call a brilliantly slippery novel, so yes, I want to read that. Wandering Stars. Again, I keep feeling so guilty every time I see this come up because I still haven't read Tommy Orange's novel There. So yeah, I do want to read this, but as also read There. Whale Fall, a historical book of historical fiction that I've read about before, sounds really good. I want to read that. Poignant autofiction, What Does It Feel Like? A best-selling author and mother of 5 wakes up from surgery to remove a brain tumor. Wow. Okay. But it's also meant to be devastatingly funny. Wild Houses by Colin Barrett. Yes, I've read it. Was such a great read. Really great, plotty, thrilling story, as well as such interesting character story. The Women. Yes, I've read about this historical novel. Sounds good. You Dreamed of Empires, hallucinogenic historical fiction. Wow, yeah, that sounds fascinating. Want to read it. You Should Be So Lucky. Queer sports romance. I don't know how I'd get on with that. I love queer fiction. I'm not so sure about sports. Would I enjoy this? I'll just click I want to read it. now into the non-fiction. I'm guessing that probably a lot of these I won't have read or won't have heard of before. So this will be really interesting to look through. So there's The Achilles Trap. History stretches from Hussein's earliest days in power to the U.S. invasion of Iraq. Okay, want to read that. All the Worst Humans, memoir by a former public relations operative. Okay, want to read that. All Things Are Too Small. Yes, I read about this in Time Magazine's list as well. Has such a great cover. Okay, yeah, I really want to read this. I wonder if it's been published here or not. I'm gonna have to, I'll look that up after making this video. The Anxious Generation. Yes, this sounds very good and very topical. Want to read that. Be Ready When Luck Happens. It sounds fun. I don't think I'll get to reading it anytime soon, but I would really enjoy reading it. Book of Literary Criticism, The Black Box. I don't think I've heard of this. A Harvard scholar shows how African-American writers have used the written word to shape their reality despite constraints imposed on them from outside, using the metaphor of the box to reflect ordeals withstood and survived since Africans were first brought to the continent. Sounds really interesting. The Black Utopians, philosophical family memoir that, I've read about before. Sounds so good. The Blue Stockings, feminist history, before Wollstonecraft, Susan B. Anthony, or Virginia Woolf. There were the Blue Stockings, a group of British women and thinkers who, as Gibson writes in this intimate social history, transgressed sexist conventions to educate themselves. That sounds really fascinating. So yeah, I'm sure it's been published here, but I don't think I've heard of it before. Challenger, nonfiction book about the 1986 space shuttle disaster and how it was such a mess and was preventable. I watched a whole documentary about this and was really interested in this history of the Challenger explosion. I even many years ago wrote a novel which was partly sort of connected with, or at least the events of the novel kind of led up to the Challenger explosion. So I've always been fascinated with this point in history and where it sort of feels like this like realization of the dream of civilians being able to go to space, but then the explosion of that dream, it feels like quite poignant for my generation. And so yes, I want to read that. A food biography called Chop, Fry, Watch, Learn. I've not heard of this before, the Julia Child of Chinese cooking. So yeah, that sounds like a lot of fun. I don't think I'll get to it anytime soon, but yeah, I'll click I want to read it. A book on religion called Circle of Hope. As many American evangelical congregations moved to the political right over the past decade, Circle of Hope in Philadelphia became more progressive. Wow, that sounds fascinating. So yeah, I want to read that. Glad to know about it now. A book of film history called Cocktails with George and Martha. Now, one of my favorite films of all time is Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf? So rarely seen diary entries from the screenwriter who adapted Edward Albee's Broadway hit are a highlight of this unapologetically obsessive behind-the-scenes look at the classic film starring Richard Burton and Elizabeth Taylor. This sounds like the perfect book for me. Okay, I'm gonna put this on my Christmas wish list, and if I don't get it, then I'm gonna buy it for myself, because this sounds amazing. I definitely want to read that. That should be another category of like, yes, definitely want to read that soon. A World War II memoir called Cold Crematorium, in this transcendent Holocaust memoir by a journalist and poet internee, translated by Paul Aukervary. The details of the concentration camps and their horrors are rendered so precisely that any critical distance collapses. Wow, that sounds like a really powerful, but read, but like one that I would need to really like brace myself for. So want to read that. Connie Chun's memoir. Yeah, that would be a lot of fun to read. A book on TV history called Q the Sun, from Queen for a Day to the Real World Survivor and The Apprentice. It's all here in Nussbaum's passionate, exquisitely told origin story of reality TV. That sounds really interesting. But yeah, probably another book that I won't get to anytime soon. A glitzy downtown memoir called Do Something. Trebay is a veteran of the style wars. Prior to joining this paper, he stints as a handbag designer, a busboy at Max's Kansas City, a model, and a reporter at the Village Voice, chronicling a lost New York that was as gritty as it was glamorous. That sounds like a lot of fun. So yes, want to read that. A classical music history, Every Valley. King uses Handel's Messiah, possibly the greatest piece of participatory art ever created as a hub, whose spokes radiate, I can't speak anymore, radiate outwards to a host of key historical forces and personalities that characterize 18th century Britain. Not sure that would be really a book for me, but sure, I'll click I want to read it. Just go past. A book on current events. Everyone Who Is Gone Is Here. Oh yeah, I've read about this. Sounds like such a powerful book about the migrant crisis. Yes, I want to read it. Phi or Phi, I'm not sure how to pronounce this this memoir about grief, but yeah, I've read about this. Sounds very good, but yeah, another book that I need to really brace myself before reading. Health and Safety by Emily DeWitt. The author, Emily Witt's boyfriend Andrew, started behaving erratically when pandemic lockdowns put an end to the underground party scene in Brooklyn's Bushwick neighborhood. So yeah, okay, looking at that time period and dealing with that sounds interesting. A book on economics, The Hidden Globe. Oh yeah, I've read a lot about this book. It sounds really fascinating. So I will click want to read that. I heard her call my name. Yeah, before the Times list, I hadn't, or the Washington Post list. I hadn't heard of this memoir about gender transition, and yeah, but it sounds so good, and it's meant to be very funny and joyful as well. A book of essays called I Just Keep Talking, which I feel feels like what I'm doing now. I'm going through this list. So painter, a historian and author who left academia to attend art school at the age of 64, highlights her original mind and irreverent wit in this collection. That sounds really fascinating. A political biography called John Lewis, which is a panoramic and richly insightful biography that tells the full story of the civil rights hero who became a long-serving U.S. representative and moral force in America. That sounds really fascinating. Although here in the UK, when I see John Lewis, I just think of the department store chain that I heard someone pronounce once Jean-Louis. But yeah, that sounds really fascinating. So want to read that. Salman Rushdie's new memoir called Knife, about his experiences being attacked and almost killed. I do want to read that. Oh, Language City by Ross Perlin. Yes, I want to read this nonfiction book, which sounds so good, looking at languages that are dying out, and specifically some speakers in New York City who are amongst the last speakers of these rare languages and endangered languages. So definitely want to read that. Lonely One, a Supreme Court memoir. Wow, okay, yeah, that sounds fascinating. A book on American history called Madness, where Antonia Hilton spent a decade researching the history of Crownsville, a segregated mental hospital that operated in Maryland for 91 years. Wow, that sounds really interesting and powerful. But a little side note, did you know that in the UK, a lot of English people pronounce Maryland as Maryland, which I just think is so adorable. I'm sorry, that's not to take away from the seriousness of this book, but yeah, it's a funny side note. The Message, a book on current events by Ta-Nehisi Coates. Yes, such a great writer. I want to read this. The New India, an Indian investigative journalist, Bhatia watched in dismay as relatives, friends, and fellow citizens embraced the increasingly extreme politics of his country's Hindu nationalist prime minister. That sounds really fascinating. A book on sports, The New York Game. Now, I grew up being taken to baseball games by my father, which I loved. It was such an enjoyable thing for us to do together. And I do enjoy going to a baseball game for nostalgic reasons now, but I'm not so interested in reading about the game or like following anything about it. So I'm just going to skip that for now. But it might be a good book to buy from my father for Christmas. A family history memoir called No One Gets to Fall Apart. A TV writer chronicles her mother's descent into what would eventually be diagnosed as schizophrenia. Wow, yeah, that's another book that I would really need to brace myself before reading. A book on current events called Private Revolutions. A journalist followed 4 very different young women as they navigated what she calls China's new social order. That sounds really interesting. A political biography about Reagan. I'm sure that would be really fascinating, but it's not the sort of thing that I would be naturally drawn to. But again, it would probably be another good book that for my father, who really likes to read about American history. A post-colonial biography called The Rebels Clinic, an absorbing biography of the Black psychiatrist, writer, and revolutionary Frantz Fanon. Yeah, that sounds really fascinating. A book on current events on the return of great powers, an absorbing account of 21st century brickmanship. Takes readers from Ukraine in the days before Russia's invasion to the Taiwan Strait. Interesting. Okay. Salvage, a book on literary criticism where a Trinidadian-born poet and novelist wears her erudition lightly in this eloquent and witty book of essayistic meditations on English literary classics. Wow, that sounds really fascinating. So want to read that. Soldiers and Kings. Yeah, I keep hearing great things about this book on nonfiction. So yeah, do definitely want to read that. Splinters by Leslie Jamison, a memoir, I think about breaking up. And yeah, I've read about this before. It sounds really good. Book on politics, Stolen Pride, where a renowned sociologist returns with a sequel to her Prescient Strangers in Their Own Land, a Trump country dispatch from the Deep South. So yeah, looking at Trump's new win. So yeah, okay, interesting. Want to read that. The Swans of Harlem, a dance history for those who believe that the narrative of Black prima ballerinas begins and ends with Misty Copeland. Valby's rich, prismatic portrait of the 5 dancers who formed the core of the Dance Theater of Harlem's inaugural 1969 class offers a joyful and spirited corrective. Wow, that's sounds really interesting, but probably not a book that I'll get to anytime soon. There's always this year now, because I'd initially read about, this is about basketball. I wasn't all that interested in it, but I've heard so many good things about it, and lots of readers telling me that this book is about much more than basketball. That, yeah, definitely I want to read that. So yes, do want to get to it. A book on religion called Undivided, where a political scientist learned that a mostly white and broadly conservative Cincinnati megachurch had resolved to fight racial injustice in its community. She decided to follow the story. It's a sensitive study of admirable intentions, earnest action, and the often painful price of real change. That sounds really fascinating. So want to read that. An adventure memoir called A Walk in the Park, where two friends walk the length of the Grand Canyon. I'm probably won't get around to that anytime soon, but yeah, I'm sure it'd be really interesting to read. When the Clock Broke, a book on American history, looking at the election in 1992 and how that kind of changed the political landscape, and we can see the repercussions of that today. Definitely want to read that. The Wide Sea, about Captain Cook and his third voyage. And that sounds like an interesting seafaring tale. And then finally, there's a biography of a marriage called A Wilder Shore by Camille Perry. Robert Louis Stevenson's American wife, Fanny Vandegrift, was a powerful personality in her own right, an individualist who paid no mind to conventional gender roles, and a brave and sometimes reckless adventurer who encouraged Stevenson's penchant for a wandering life. I've never heard of this before, or of this figure from history. That sounds really fascinating. So I want to read that. Okay, so I don't think it's like... yes, again, I did even less well with this list book. I've only read 8 from this list, but I want to read 86. So I have a lot of reading to get to, but yeah, it's just fun to look through these lists for reading suggestions and to make me aware of books and to see which books come up again and again. And there have been several books on here that I've seen on other lists and that now I'm very aware of and do want to get to reading. So do let me know in the comments below how many of these have you read and how many you want to read, and and what books you think should be added to the list. So I'll just show you, I've been propping my computer up on these books, which I've been reading recently, and I would definitely, and so Our Evenings, yes, was on the list, and I definitely agree with that. Although I just read this debut novel called The Fertile Earth, which I thought was excellent, and I would add to the list as well. And I'm currently reading this novel called A Little Trickery, which I'm really enjoying. I probably won't categorize as one of the best of the year, but it's really enjoyable to read. Anyway, just a little peek at what I've been reading in the past month. But I hope you're doing well and reading good things, and I will speak to you again soon. Bye-bye.